The first time the principal laughed, the sound cut through the hallway like something sharp breaking glass. It was not loud, but it was cruel in its certainty, the kind of laugh that came from someone who believed they already knew the ending of the story. Students froze where they stood. Teachers looked away. A thin boy in a faded uniform stood at the center of it all, his school bag clutched tightly to his chest, his eyes steady, even as the words that followed tried to crush him. "You cannot afford this school," the principal said, smiling as though he were offering helpful advice. "Do not embarrass yourself or your father any further." Before this story goes any further, pause for a moment. If you believe stories about dignity, sacrifice, and quiet strength still matter, tap like, subscribe, and stay with me until the end. Because what unfolds here will change how you see power and pride forever. The boy's name was Daniel Okoye, and he did not cry. He did not argue. He did not beg. He simply nodded once, the way someone does when they hear something they have already prepared themselves to hear, and turned toward the door of the principal's office. That single movement seemed to satisfy the man behind the desk, who leaned back in his chair and folded his hands, convinced the matter was settled. What the principal did not know was that Daniel had learned long ago how to swallow humiliation without letting it poison his spirit. He had practiced it in cramped rooms where electricity failed more often than it worked, in long walks to school when rain soaked his shoes, in nights when his father came home silent and exhausted, his hands rough and scarred from work no one ever praised. Daniel had learned that dignity was not something given by uniforms or buildings or money. It was something you carried quietly, even when others tried to strip it away. St. Bartholomew's Academy stood like a fortress at the edge of the city, its high walls painted cream, its gates guarded by uniformed security, its grounds manicured with the kind of care that suggested nothing inside was ever allowed to decay. It was the school where ministers sent their children, where business magnates sponsored new science labs in exchange for plaques bearing their names, where success was assumed long before graduation day arrived. Daniel did not belong there, at least not by the standards everyone seemed to agree upon. His admission had been an accident, or at least that was how it felt to him, a scholarship form left on a church table, a teacher who noticed how quickly he solved problems on the blackboard, an entrance exam Daniel took without expectations, using a borrowed pen, his hands shaking not from fear, but from the weight of hope he did not dare name. When the acceptance letter arrived, his father had read it 3 times in silence before folding it carefully and placing it inside a drawer as though it was something fragile and sacred. From the first day Daniel walked through the gates, he felt the difference. Shoes polished to mirrors passed by his scuffed pair. Conversations floated around him about vacations abroad and gadgets he had only seen behind glass. He learned to keep his head down, to answer questions only when asked, to let his grades speak for him in a language numbers could not distort. Most teachers noticed. Some admired him. A few resented him. And the principal, Mr. Andrew Whitmore, watched him with thinly veiled suspicion. Mr. Whitmore believed deeply in order, in hierarchy, in the idea that institutions thrived when everyone knew their place. He wore his authority like a tailored suit, always immaculate, always pressed. He had risen through the ranks of private education by cultivating donors and enforcing standards that favored those who could pay without flinching. To him, scholarships were marketing tools, symbols of generosity that looked good in brochures. They were not meant to disrupt the balance. Daniel disrupted it simply by existing. It began with small things. A request for Daniel to submit proof of payment again, even though his scholarship covered his fees. A reminder sent home about uniform standards when Daniel's blazer showed signs of wear. A summons to the office whenever a donor's child complained about seating arrangements or group assignments. Daniel endured it all silently, his father advising him each night to focus on his studies and ignore the noise. Education is a door, his father told him once, their voices low as a generator hummed outside. Some people stand in front of it to show power, others open it quietly and walk through. You just walk, my son. The day everything came to a head started like any other. Morning assembly under a pale sun, announcements about upcoming fundraising events, a speech from Mr. Whitmore about excellence and tradition. Daniel listened, his mind already on the mathematics test scheduled for later. He did not notice the way the principal's gaze lingered on him until his name was called over the loudspeaker. Daniel Okoye, please report to the principal's office immediately. Whispers followed him down the hallway. He felt them brush against his back, sharp with curiosity. Inside the office, Mr. Whitmore sat behind his desk, a file open before him. Two members of the board stood near the window, their expressions unreadable. Sit, the principal said, gesturing vaguely. Daniel remained standing. I understand, Mr. Whitmore continued, tapping the file, that your father has missed another meeting regarding outstanding contributions. My scholarship covers my fees, Daniel said calmly. My father has no contributions. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Whitmore's smile tightened. This institution survives on generosity, he said. We cannot carry students whose families do not support our vision. Daniel looked at him, really looked, and for a moment something passed between them. A quiet challenge the principal did not appreciate. You cannot afford this school, Mr. Whitmore said then, the words delivered with a practiced air of finality. It would be best for you to leave with what little dignity you have left. That was when Daniel nodded and turned away, the laughter following him like a shadow. News traveled fast. By lunchtime, everyone knew. Some classmates avoided him, afraid association might stain them. A few offered awkward words of sympathy. One boy, the son of a prominent contractor, smirked openly and told Daniel he should be grateful for the chance he had been given at all. Daniel said nothing. He packed his books carefully at the end of the day, his movements deliberate, as though refusing to rush the moment. He walked past the gates of St. Bartholomew's Academy for what he believed was the last time, the weight of unfinished dreams pressing against his chest. At home, his father listened without interruption as Daniel recounted the day. He did not interrupt. He did not curse. He did not show anger. When Daniel finished, his father closed his eyes and breathed deeply, as though steadying himself against something unseen. Did you thank them? His father asked quietly. Daniel frowned. For what? For teaching you, the man replied. For showing you who they are. That night, Daniel's father did something he had not done in years. He opened a locked metal box hidden beneath the bed. Inside were documents wrapped carefully in plastic, yellowed with age but meticulously preserved. Deeds, letters, certificates bearing seals that glinted faintly in the dim light. He did not show them to Daniel, not yet. He simply checked them one by one, as though confirming they still existed. The next morning, Mr. Whitmore arrived at school feeling satisfied. He believed he had corrected an imbalance. During assembly, he spoke again of standards and sustainability. He assured parents through emails that the institution remained committed to excellence. He did not expect the call that came just after midday. "Sir," his secretary said, her voice uncertain, "there are visitors here to see you. They say it is urgent." "I am busy," Mr. Whitmore replied. "Tell them to make an appointment." "They insist," she said, "and they have already spoken to the board chairman." Mr. Whitmore frowned. When he looked up, he saw the board members from the previous day standing in the doorway, their expressions strained. "Andrew," one of them said, "we have a situation." Minutes later, the principal stood in the conference room, facing a man he did not recognize at first. The visitor wore a simple suit, well-pressed but unremarkable. His posture was relaxed, his gaze steady. When he spoke, his voice carried a calm authority that filled the room without effort. "My name is Samuel Okoye," he said. "I believe you met my son yesterday." Mr. Whitmore felt a flicker of irritation. "This matter has been resolved," he said. "Your son's circumstances do not align with our requirements." Samuel Okoye nodded slowly. "I understand you believe that." The board chairman cleared his throat. "Andrew," he said, "perhaps you should listen." Samuel placed a folder on the table and slid it forward. Inside were documents Mr. Whitmore recognized instantly, contracts bearing the Academy's letterhead, agreements he himself had signed years ago without much thought. "You see," Samuel continued, "I built this wing." He gestured toward the window. "I funded the scholarship program you are so fond of advertising. I chose not to attach my name to it because I wanted my son to earn his place without favors." Silence fell heavily over the room. Mr. Whitmore's mouth opened, then closed. He felt the ground shift beneath him. "I never wanted Daniel treated differently," Samuel said. "I wanted him to be judged by his character and effort. You have done that, in your own way." One of the board members avoided Mr. Whitmore's gaze. Another leaned back, arms crossed. "I will be withdrawing my support," Samuel said calmly, "effective immediately. Not because of the insult, but because an institution that cannot recognize humility and discipline does not deserve my investment." Mr. Whitmore's heart pounded. "This is highly irregular," he said weakly. "So was your laughter," Samuel replied. By the time the news reached the students, it had already grown. Donations frozen, emergency meetings called, teachers whispering in corridors. Daniel, sitting at home, knew none of it. He was reviewing his notes, preparing for an exam he might never take, because his father had taught him to finish what he started, even when the ending was uncertain. When the phone rang, Daniel answered. His father listened silently, then handed him the receiver. "Daniel," the voice on the other end said, strained and unfamiliar, "this is Mr. Whitmore. There has been a misunderstanding." Daniel looked at his father, who nodded once. "We would like you to return to school," the principal continued. "Your place here is secure." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, not in triumph, but in reflection. "I will return," he said, "but not because you asked." He hung up and looked at his father, questions burning in his eyes. Samuel smiled softly. "Some doors open only after you walk away from them," he said. The next day, Daniel walked back through the gates of St. Bartholomew's Academy. The guards straightened. Teachers watched him with new eyes. Whispers followed him again, but they were different now, edged with confusion and awe. Mr. Whitmore stood at the entrance, his smile rigid, his posture forced. Daniel passed him without a word. Inside, nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The walls were the same, the desks were the same. But Daniel felt lighter, not because of victory, but because he understood something vital. Respect given under false assumptions was fragile. Respect earned through truth endured. He returned to his classes, his focus sharper than ever. He did not boast. He did not explain. He simply learned. And in doing so, he became something far more dangerous to those who thrived on hierarchy. He became undeniable. That afternoon, Samuel Okoye stood once more at the edge of the school grounds, watching his son disappear into the building. He did not smile widely or raise his chin in pride. He simply turned and walked away, satisfied that the lesson he valued most had been taught, not through power, but through restraint. The story was not over. Not yet. Daniel felt it the moment he stepped back into the classroom. It was not admiration exactly, it was caution. Chairs shifted when he passed. Conversations dropped in volume. Even students who had never spoken to him before watched him with new interest, as if he had suddenly become a different person, overnight. He took his seat near the window and opened his notebook, grounding himself in the familiar lines and numbers. Attention had never been his goal. Learning had. The mathematics teacher, Mrs. Adeyemi, paused when she saw him. Her eyes softened briefly before she cleared her throat and continued the lesson. Daniel answered questions when called upon, his voice steady, his reasoning precise. Nothing about his behavior invited drama, yet the room buzzed with unspoken questions. At break time, a girl from his class approached him hesitantly. She was always perfectly dressed, her hair neat, her shoes spotless. "Is it true," she asked quietly, "about your father?" Daniel closed his book. "It depends on what you heard." "That he owns half the school," she said, lowering her voice. Daniel shook his head. "He owns nothing here." She frowned, confused, then nodded slowly and walked away, unsatisfied but unwilling to push further. Daniel watched her go, wondering how many versions of the truth would circulate before the day ended. In the staff room, tension hung thick in the air. Teachers spoke in measured tones, avoiding names. Mr. Whitmore had called an emergency meeting with senior staff, his instructions curt, his demeanor unusually restrained. The power he once wielded so effortlessly now felt brittle, as though one wrong move might shatter it. "We will proceed as normal," he said during the meeting, fingers interlocked tightly on the table. "There will be no gossip, no special treatment. Our reputation depends on stability." Some nodded, others exchanged glances. Everyone understood what he meant. Normality was a performance now, and everyone was expected to play their part. Daniel's father did not return home immediately after leaving the school that morning. He drove instead to the city center, to an office building whose glass exterior reflected the sky like a mirror. Inside, his name carried weight, though few faces associated it with his quiet appearance. Meetings unfolded behind closed doors. Decisions were made that did not make headlines but would ripple outward all the same. He declined interviews. He refused public statements. When asked why he did not want recognition for his contributions, he offered the same answer he always had. "Power that announces itself is often insecure," he said. "I prefer work that speaks later." At school, the weeks passed, and the initial shock faded into a new rhythm. Daniel continued to excel academically. His teachers praised him openly now, perhaps too openly. He noticed the shift and adjusted, offering help to classmates who struggled, never correcting anyone publicly, never showing frustration. He had learned patience from watching his father wait out storms without raising his voice. One afternoon during a group project, the boy who had mocked him weeks earlier was assigned to Daniel's team. The boy avoided eye contact at first, his bravado gone. "I did not know," he muttered while arranging papers. Daniel looked at him. "Know what?" "About your family," the boy said. Daniel shrugged. "You still do not." The boy flushed but nodded, accepting the boundary. They worked in silence after that, the task completed efficiently. When the teacher praised the group, Daniel made sure to credit everyone equally. Rumors reached the boardroom before they reached the playground. Donors asked questions. Parents requested meetings. The story, once contained within the walls of the school, leaked outward, stripped of nuance and filled with speculation. Mr. Whitmore found himself summoned repeatedly, his explanations growing thinner each time. He began to see Daniel not as a student, but as a mirror reflecting his own misjudgment. Each time their paths crossed, he felt a tightening in his chest, a reminder of words he could not take back. One evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the empty courtyard, Mr. Whitmore saw Daniel sitting alone on a bench, reading. On impulse, he approached, his footsteps echoing against the stone. "Daniel," he said, forcing a tone of civility, "may I sit?" Daniel looked up, surprised, then nodded. For a moment, neither spoke. The principal stared straight ahead, the polished image he curated every day slipping slightly. "I misjudged you," Mr. Whitmore said finally. Daniel closed his book. "You misjudged my value," he replied calmly. "There is a difference." The words were not spoken in anger. That made them heavier. Mr. Whitmore swallowed. "I believed I was protecting the school." "From what?" Daniel asked. The principal had no answer that did not sound small. After a pause, he stood. "You will go far," he said stiffly. Daniel watched him walk away, thinking not of triumph, but of how easily authority confused itself with wisdom. Examinations approached. Pressure mounted. For many students, the stakes were social. For Daniel, they were practical. He studied late into the night, his father often sitting nearby, reading quietly, offering presence rather than instruction. On the morning results were posted, students crowded the notice board, voices rising and falling in waves. Daniel stood back, waiting. When he finally looked, his name sat at the top, first in his year. Applause broke out spontaneously. A few teachers smiled openly. Even those who had doubted him could not deny the numbers. That afternoon, the board convened again. This time, the tone was different. "Andrew," the chairman said, folding his hands, "we need to discuss leadership." Mr. Whitmore felt his pulse quicken. "Our institution cannot survive another incident like this," another member added. "Perception matters." Mr. Whitmore understood then, not immediately but clearly. The school he had guarded so fiercely no longer trusted him to guard it. The decision was framed as a transition, a sabbatical, time to reflect. The language was polite. The outcome was final. When the announcement reached the students, reactions were mixed. Some cheered quietly, others felt uneasy. Change always carried uncertainty. Daniel listened as classmates speculated. He said nothing. That evening, He told his father about the development. Samuel nodded. Actions have consequences, he said, even for those at the top. Months passed. A new principal arrived, quieter, less concerned with appearances. Policies shifted subtly. Scholarships were reviewed with genuine intent. Teachers were encouraged to mentor, not merely instruct. Daniel thrived in the new environment, but he did not forget the old one. He volunteered to tutor younger students from less privileged backgrounds, recognizing in them the same guarded hope he once carried. On graduation day, as he stood in his gown, Daniel scanned the crowd until he found his father. Samuel stood near the back, hands clasped, eyes shining with pride. He did not try to hide. When Daniel's name was called, the applause was long and unrestrained. He walked across the stage, head high, not because he had proven anyone wrong, but because he had remained himself through the test. Years later, long after St. Bartholomew's Academy had updated its brochures and erased the memory of that uncomfortable chapter, Daniel would look back on that moment in the principal's office as a turning point, not because of the humiliation, but because of what followed. He learned that power often mistook silence for weakness, that dignity could survive mockery, that the truest measure of a person was how they treated others when no reward waited. And he learned something else, something his father had always known. You do not need to announce who you are. The world will find out when it matters. If this story reminded you that humility can outlast arrogance and that quiet strength often wins in the end, support this channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it today.